Yes, Susan.
I would also say that Ted Cruz and Donald Trump also seem to be in a contest among themselves to see who could respond the hardest to these attacks and seem the hardest on defense. And Ted Cruz received a little bit of criticism on his own because one of his response, he said, was that the American security forces should patrol Muslim neighborhoods in response to this.
But didn't he sort of walk back on that?
He did walk back from that, but that was in the initial response. He came sort of echoing Donald Trump's calls to sort of monitor Muslims more closely, and notably the New York police commissioner came out publicly and criticized Ted Cruz and said, Muslim Americans are part of our strongest allies in this fight. Muslims abroad are part of our strongest allies in this fight, and this language to alienate them. But it's good for the Republican primary. I think Donald Trump has sucked up so much oxygen in this fight and what he's done to the party, but issues of national security are probably one of the most motivating forces for Republican primary voters, particularly in the rise of the Islamic State. When you talk to voters, this is something that really concerns them.
But what's interesting, however, is that voters usually aren't interested in foreign policy.
They are interested in terrorism, and they view this as terrorism, and they view this as a terrorist threat that is coming to the United States.
And I think that's right. To your question about, mostly we tend to say voters are not that interested in foreign policy in elections. That probably remains the case. But as Susan says, what voters want to do is to feel safe. And so what you have is these very, very clear contrasting views on how you keep Americans safe. And Hillary Clinton's speech, as Neil says, at Stanford University, with some members of the high grand poobahs of the foreign policy establishment, like William Perry, former defense secretary, and George Shultz, former secretary of state, sitting in the audience kind of offering their silent endorsement of her view. She's talking about classic statecraft, coalition building, working with Muslim allies, talking about the internet. You can't build a wall that keeps the internet out. That kind of rational, you could call it fact-based kind of approach to keeping America safe. But it's incredibly tempting for the Republican primary electorate to feel that if America is just more frightening, if America is more intimidating, if America is more violent, if it's torturing people and taking these people who cut heads off and frightening them into submission, that will keep the world at bay. And that's, as Neil says, absolutely not the post-Reagan Cold War sort of view of foreign policy in the Republican Party, but this isn't Ronald Reagan's Republican Party.
I wanted to go back just for a moment to Ted Cruz's suggestion of monitoring neighborhoods. To have the New York Police Department, who had to roll back their own monitoring program after it was discovered that they had been listening in on people, it's sort of ironic that they're the ones chastening Ted Cruz.
He did also note that and this is according to the police commissioner, that there's over 1,000 Muslims in the NYPD.
We also just don't have neighborhoods in the same way that they're
Right.
dealing with neighborhoods in Belgium and in Paris. We don't have big, dense, seething, discontented Muslim neighborhoods.
And one of the things, I've done quite a lot of reporting since 9/11 from, say, I interviewed a Muslim American FBI agent years ago in the New York field office. America has historically, since 9/11, been much better than a lot of European countries at working with mosques, working with Muslim communities. Imams will immediately go to their local FBI contact who they know really well and say, there's someone who's turned up in my mosque, I don't like how they're talking, you should keep an eye on them. That sort of relationship has historically worked much, much better in America. So that's all the more tragic to see someone like Ted Cruz kind of playing pyromaniac, really, and sort of doing stuff that is likely to damage those community relations.
Republicans also, in the current field, like to say that this is a conversation that Barack Obama started, but Barack Obama is actually much closer to George W. Bush on this. I mean, Bush had a similar view on how you talk about Muslim Americans, how you talk about Muslims in the country, and it's more of a continuation of the previous administration than something that Obama started independent.
You are listening to The Diane Rehm Show and the Friday News Roundup.